Good morning and welcome to the convening of Bermuda's legislature for the year 2025. I'm Tina Evans, and with me today is my friend and colleague, Heather Wood. Good morning.
Morning, Tina. And how are you today?
On this Bermuda beautiful day, the weather just is delightful today. It really
Absolutely
is.
gorgeous. But we were just here 4 months ago.
Just four
Just
short months
short-
ago, we were doing the speech from the throne and the convening.
Mm.
And then, of course, Parliament was dissolved and election has taken place.
Place.
We have so many things to tell you and share with you as part of our commentary today about the proceedings and the knowledge and the historical Bermuda's fascinating political evolution. In 1690, John Locke wrote, "In all cases where government subsists, the legislature is the supreme power." Hence, the convening of the legislature, which officially authorizes the government to carry out its duties and responsibilities. Today's ceremony, replete with pomp and ceremony, holds much significance. For your convenience, today's proceedings are being provided on via CITV, via social media, a Facebook, via YouTube, and on the government portal as well. So you should be able to find us somewhere.
That's
We'll
right.
be,
The
we'll be-
technology is allowing.
Yes, indeed. The government of Bermuda is led by the Premier of Bermuda, the Honorable E. David Burt, JP MP of the Progressive Labor Party, and the opposition is led by Mr. Jerry Richardson of the One Bermuda Alliance.
Tina, not only is the beginning of the new legislative calendar, is this the beginning, it is also distinctive because it marks the start of the Progressive Labor Party's third consecutive rule as the government, having won the general election held in February of this year, as you just referred to. Listeners and those watching via YouTube may recall that the Premier, the Honorable E. David Burt, having gained the approval of the then Governor, Her Excellency Rena Lauji, announced in January that there would be a general election. That approval was the final official act of the then Governor. Today, Bermuda's newly appointed Governor, His Excellency Andrew Murdoch, will preside over the convening of the legislature and will read the speech from the throne, which outlines government's agenda for 2025.
Yes, and currently in the House of Assembly, in the chamber, chambers is closed. The House convened at 10 a.m. this morning, and the clerk to the legislature, he read the certified list of members. There was the election of the speaker held, and I'm pleased to announce that Dennis Lister, Sr., as the speaker. I'm delighted for that.
That's
for
wonderful.
him. The speaker will take his oath or has taken his oath. He will administer the oaths to the premier, the leader of the opposition. The speaker will then administer the oaths to the member of parliament, and then a deputy speaker is elected. Once that is done, the motion from the floor to the House be moved, and the letter, the dispatch, will be two members of the House will go to His Excellency, the representative. They will receive the letter, and the two members of the House are newly elected members, Paul G.E. Wilmont and Mr. Dwayne Robinson. They'll receive the letter from the governor and then take it back, and then the black rod will pick up. But we'll talk more about that as going. It is noteworthy, you talked about the Progressive Labor Party successfully winning the general election, that they're by other political parties this time around. It was an interesting
It
election
was,
cycle.
wasn't it?
The One Bermuda Alliance, the Freedom Democratic Movement, and there were also challenges from persons who ran as independent candidates. We had an unprecedented 109 persons seeking political office. It was crazy. We couldn't believe it.
We couldn't.
I couldn't keep up.
There was much chatter.
It was, but it was a good
Intensive.
election
It was.
season. It was a good election. As the ceremony proceeds, we will think it appropriate that we provide you with some of the landmarks that bear witness to Bermuda's political development.
So Bermuda has progressed politically to that of a self-governing territory with control over most of our internal affairs. We've arrived at that position primarily as a result of the constitutional order of 1968. And we shall share with you several of the significant hallmarks resulting from this document. It also outlines the governing of our island and the duties associated with that. Bermuda's legislative body, comprising of members of the Senate, also referred to as the upper house, and members of the House of Assembly, also referred to as the lower house. As you indicated, Tina, they are gathered officially and will soon be coming down.
Listener, you may also be aware that Bermuda's legislative body is the oldest in the Commonwealth outside of the British Isles. The oldest in the Commonwealth outside of the British Isles, and dates back to August 1st, 1620, when the governor, Nathaniel Butler, summoned a General Assembly to meet at St. Peter's Church in St. George's, at that time the capital. And the General Assembly consisted of the governor, his council, 2 male representatives of each of the 8 tribes as a colony, and divided into tribes which were later distinguished as parishes. And I do believe I see the members of the judiciary arriving. And let me just take a moment to thank them. The judges of the Supreme Court, the Honorable Mrs. Justice Sade Subir Williams, the Honorable Justice Warren Wolf, the Honorable Justice Alan Richards, the Honorable Justice Andrew Martin, the Honorable Justice Alex Wheatley, acting judge.
I see the magistrates are there as well, Tina. So we have the senior magistrate, Her Worship, Mrs. Maxanne Anderson, His Worship, Mr. Tyrone Chin, His Worship, Mr. Craig Attridge, Her Worship, Ms. Maria Sothianis, Her Worship, Mrs. Aura Lee Cassidy. They look splendid in there.
I'm missing the Chief Justice, Mr. Larry Musselden. Okay, so I just gave him a shout out, as they call it, to the CJ, to the Chief Justice. So we have those arrival, and pretty soon we'll have the arrival of the senators as well. The senators will be arriving. It's worth pointing out that although women now serve in both the House of Assembly and the Senate, this was not the case for almost 2 centuries. The efforts that brought about women's presence in both the House of Parliament were in large part the result of those determined and resilient ladies who were part of the women's suffragette movement in Bermuda. One of those leading women is now a Bermuda national hero, and that is Mrs. Gladys Mizik Morrell. At the first meeting back in 1620 of Bermuda's General Assembly, the governor advised representatives, and I quote, "We come not for ourselves only, or any man's in particular, but to serve and regard the public. We are to therefore rid ourselves from all desires of gain, and we are to despise all personal interests." Sage advice and still relevant today. And it is in that spirit, the time-honored practice, that Bermuda's legislature convenes today as we embark upon legislative year. And we, of course, this is the day that starts it all. It starts off the legislative agenda.
It certainly is. That the general election that we just held resulted in the Progressive Party having won 25 of the 36 seats, and therefore forms the current government. The One Bermuda Alliance won the remaining 11 seats, hence forms the official opposition. Although 25 independent candidates, as we just mentioned, none were successful. There are several newly elected members of the House of Assembly and newly appointed senators who will be reminded of the awesome duty that is theirs as they go about attending to the people's business. The newly elected PLP members of the House of Assembly are Mr. Owen Darrow, who previously held the role of Senate leader for the government. Mr. Darrow successfully won constituency C15, Pembroke East Central, and is the Minister for Tourism, Culture, and Sport, and will be the Minister for Transport as well. Ms. Alexa Lightburn was successful in winning the seat for constituency C14. This is her first time running as a political candidate. Ms. Lightburn has also been chosen by the Premier to serve in his cabinet. She is the new Minister for Home Affairs. And we made reference to Mr. Paul Wilmot. He was successful in winning constituency C27, and the other newly elected Progressive Labour Party member, Reverend Leroy Bean. He successfully won constituency C5.
And at 10:30, we should see the Senate will adjourn. The Senate is meeting. Vice President of the Senate will lead the Senate from the chambers, which is directly behind the audience, the guest, the seating area, of course. At the Senate chamber, they will come down to the Cabinet lawn. The President-elect will remain at the steps of the Cabinet office. His Excellency, the Governor, Andrew Murdoch, will arrive at 10:38. And we ask that at the arrival of His Excellency, the Governor, standing until the national anthem is played, His Excellency will alight the landau and steps of the Cabinet office, and he'll be met by the President-elect and the commanding officer. The motorcade will then move off, right. So the newly elected members of the House of Assembly for the One Bermuda Alliance are Ms. Robin Tucker, having previously served in the Senate as the OBA Senate Leader, one constituency 7 in Hamilton. And I saw her today, and I asked her, how many times did you run? She said twice. But I'm very excited for her to now take a seat in the House of Assembly. Always great to see more women joining the ranks. I'm sorry, I just had to trust.
Had to say that.
It's Women's History Month. I can say it. Michael Fay, founding member of the OBA, previously served as a senator and minister for the OBA in 2012 to 2017. He's been elected. Douglas Ducuto, newly elected member of the House of Assembly for the One Bermuda Alliance, previously served in the Senate. He won constituency C25. Warwick Northwest. Linda Smith, who ran for the first time as a political candidate, was elected to the House of Assembly representing C31, Southampton West Central. And Mr. Vance Campbell, who's not new to the House of Assembly, but he's new this time as he got elected this time for the OBA, and he represents constituency C9, Smiths West. So new members of Parliament. Hopefully it will be good debate, good discussion.
Yes. And speaking of that, people may ask, well, what are the responsibilities and function of Parliament? So let's just share that.
Yeah.
The functions of Parliament, broadly speaking, to make and change laws, also referred to as legislation, to debate important issues of the day, and to check and approve government spending. Weber, a political scholar, whilst expanding upon Parliament's function, noted that political legitimacy exists because the people in society consider that their institutions are legitimate. These institutions have existed for a very long time. People have faith in their leaders and institutions, and because they view the legal systems that surround these institutions as fair in their operations. However, David Beetham offered the view that what is more important is both input legitimacy, whether people believe in the way people who run are chosen, and output legitimacy, whether people are satisfied with the policies from Parliament.
And I do believe we have the arrival of His Excellency Andrew Murdoch. No,
that's the
the
Premier's
arrival.
wife.
Yeah, okay, Tina. So the arrival of the Premier's wife, Mrs. Kristen Burt, and we're excited to. All right, now we'll pick up. I've got to keep my timing. We must remember our timing. Mhm. And also waiting for the arrival of the senators.
Yes.
The two questions that you posed as well, see Bishop Nicholas Dill. Broadly speaking, the main function, you talked about the main functions of Parliament, and the statement that you talked of the input and output legitimacy. The statement you referenced raises two questions of how Bermuda's MPs and the members of Senate are chosen, including the electoral system that is used. Whilst the second observation raises the questions about whether or not people's concerns are being addressed by Parliament, earlier we observed that Bermuda has evolved politically. Such development is in larger part attributable to the Constitutional Order of 1968. That document articulates several critical features for Bermuda. The requirement that there be a cabinet that replaced the governor's council that was in place from 1620, the election procedures, of qualifications for serving as members of parliament, and responsibilities of the government.
Speaking of that, key Bermudian personalities who contributed significantly to the crafting of the constitutional order included such persons as the late Dame Lois Brown Evans. She was joined at the conference by other PLP representatives, Mr. Walter N.H. Robinson, Mrs. Dorothy F. Thompson, advisors Mr. Wilfred Allen, Mr. Bing, and Mr. Hugh Richardson. The United Bermuda Party representatives included Sir Henry Tucker, Mr. J.M.S. Patton, Sir Bayard Dill, the Honorable G.O. Ratterley, the Honorable E.T. Richards, Mr. J.H. Sharp, E. Sperling, Sir Henry Vesey, and advisors Mr. Heald, the Honorable J. Plowman, Dr. E.S. Rattery, Dr. J. Stubbs, and Mr. L.E.P. Tyler. As well, there were independent members, His Honorable Sir John Cox, Mr. G.O. Darrell, Mr. A.A. Francis, and Mr. H.T. Watlington, the then Governor and Commander-in-Chief, the Right Honorable Lord Martinmere, and the Attorney General, the Honorable J.C. Summerfield, participated in this conference as well.
And I've seen the arrival of the permanent secretaries of the Bermuda government as well. And to provide some background regarding that conference, the following information is found in the report of the Bermuda's Constitutional Conference, 1966. In November of 1963, the two houses of the legislature appointed a joint select committee to consider a report on what constitutional changes, if any, were desirable. As a consequence, the first interim report of the joint select committee of the legislation was enacted, abolishing the property vote and restoring the voting age to 21. The second report of the Joint Select Committee recommended a number of changes necessary for the introduction of responsible government, and the Secretary of State for the colonies was asked to receive the delegation to discuss constitutional changes. This is critical for Bermuda's history. This constitutional conference was convened on 8th of November 1966 at Marlborough House under the chairmanship of the UK Secretary of State for the Colonies. After much discussion, including such key issues such as constituency boundaries, each constituency contained a number of voters, and another critical concern that each vote having equal value. The conference eventually produced a new constitutional order signed on Tuesday, 22nd of November, 1966, and came into effect 2 years later, June 14th, 1968. Some have referred to the Constitution as the internal self-governing form mechanism because it gave responsibility for domestic matters such as education, health, transportation, finance, public works, and immigration to the local Bermuda government, whilst the governor retains control over external affairs, defense, including the armed forces, internal security, and the police.
In 1972, there was approval to some other changes to the Constitution, and as a result, Sir Edward Richards, the government leader at the time, became no premier after 1973. Also, the premier was now chairman of the cabinet instead of the governor being chairman of the executive council. There was a conference in 1979, and as a result of that conference held at Warwick Camp, the designation of Executive Council and Legislative Council changed to Cabinet and Senate, respectively. This conference also brought about other changes. It provided that elected members of Parliament were now referred to as MPs, an abbreviation for Members of Parliament. Previously, they were referred to as members of the Colonial Parliament, MCPs. And another significant change was that members in charge became ministers. The people who worked and advocated for changes, attending that conference and those supporting it, had a vision of Bermuda being led by its own people, determining its destiny. They dared to dream boldly and unabashedly.
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did.
It is important to note that there were key figures who, without fear, challenged the status quo. For example, the evolution of the franchise is a result of persons questioned and challenged the status quo, old voting rights and right requirements, make Bermuda a just and equitable and inclusive society. Our listener, you may be aware that the right to vote was not always afforded to all Bermudians. I have to remind young people about this all the time. The right to vote was not always afforded to all Bermudians, 18 years or older. This fundamental democratic right has come as a result of resolve, resilience, persistence, courage displayed by certain individuals and groups. Previously, from the 1600s and officially established by legislation in 1789, only white males who owned land valued at 24 pounds were eligible to vote. Political candidates, to be a candidate, you had to own land valued at 125 pounds. This law had the effect, of course, of disenfranchising, excluding most of Bermuda's population from the political process, rendering them voiceless in their own homeland. Property-owning women finally gained the right to vote in 1944, came as a direct result of the actions and persistence of, as we said, the Women's Suffragette Society, organized, and they formed in 1923 to raise awareness.
The property requirements had the effect, as you said, of disenfranchising the majority of the black people. It's rather telling that after emancipation, which occurred in 1834, the land requirements were raised significantly, such that only males.
I'm going to just pause right here. His Excellency, the Governor, Andrew Murdoch, is arriving now on the Landau and the Landau. At the East Gate, we ask that all stand for the arrival, please, of His Excellency, the Governor, and remain standing until the national anthem is played. His Excellency will alight the Landau at the steps of the Cabinet Office, where he will be met by the President-elect and the commanding officer of the Royal Bermuda Regiment. A motorcade will move off and the national anthem will be played. His Excellency, the Governor, after the greeting, will dispatch Black Rod, Chief Inspector Andrew Smalling, standing outside of the Assembly entrance to the Cabinet building, and he will summon the House of Assembly. The Governor will say, "Gentlemen, usher of the Black Rod, I command you to inform His Honor, the Speaker of the House of Assembly. I request the presence of His Honorable House forthwith." And Black Rod will be dispatched to carry that message. At the same time, at the Reed Street entrance, the two members of the House of Assembly and Black Rod having been dispatched to deliver the governor's message, the governor will now move inside the Senate chambers with the Senate President, Joan Dillis Wright. Andrew Smalling, as I said, Chief Inspector Andrew Smalling is the Black Rod this year, and he will now deliver the message to the House. And should there be no constitutional crisis or anything like that going on up at the House of Assembly, they should be proceeding down, having received the message from the governor as well. Okay?
Yes. As I was saying, in talking about the evolution.
And all to be seated. You can
All
be
to
seated.
be seated, yes.
Please.
Thank you. As I was mentioning with regard to the evolution of voting rights, after emancipation, the land requirements were raised significantly, such that only males who owned land worth 60 pounds or more were eligible. And to be a political candidate, a male had to own property valued at 240 pounds. We see the arrival.
We now have the arrival of the members of the Senate. As we mentioned, the President of the Senate, Joan Dillis Wright, is inside with the Governor, His Excellency. John Wright is the Vice President of the Senate. Tawana Tannock is the new independent senator appointed by Governor Murdoch. The Honorable Kim Wilkinson, JP, is the Attorney General and Minister of Justice and Government Senate Leader. Other government senators are Mrs. Lindsay Simmons, Senator and Junior Minister for Youth, Social Development and Seniors, Home Affairs and National Security. Mishka Fubler, Senator and Junior Minister for the Cabinet, Digital Innovation, Public Works and the Environment. The Honorable Minister Crystal Caesar, who is the Minister of Education. And newly appointed Mrs. Lauren Bell, Senator and Junior Minister for Health, Economy, Labor, Housing, and Municipalities. The opposition senators are Mr. Marcus Jones, welcome back to the Senate, and Victoria Cunningham, newly appointed, and Mr. Maurice Foley, newly appointed opposition senators.
We want to make reference to the work done by the Committee for Universal Adult Suffrage. This committee was formed by Paulu Camaracafego. He was previously known as Roosevelt Brown, and this organization challenged Bermuda's political system, in particular, the voting and requirements. They challenged Bermuda's undemocratic voting system, and as a result, in 1963, the Parliamentary Election Act allowed every Bermudian 25 years or older to have the right to vote. That was monumental indeed. Because of his tireless efforts and unswerving commitment to a more democratic voting system that affords equal rights to all adults, Paulu Camaracafego had the title of National Hero conferred upon him. Further political developments occurred in 1966 when the voting age requirement was lowered to 21 years and the property vote was withdrawn. In 1990, the voting age requirement was finally lowered to 18 years.
Mm-hmm. And during the lead up to the recently held election, general election, many people, as we talked about initially, were intrigued by and discussed passionately and exhaustively the comments and everything, that involvement and presence of independent candidates. That was a big discussion there. The Senate President has arrived, and she is taking her place. It is worth noting that independent political candidates, it's not a new phenomenon.
No,
it really isn't in Bermuda's political landscape. It was just we
haven't had independence in quite a while,
yes.
so
Yeah,
that
it was just
caused such discussion.
It was many.
Many.
In a recent by-election in Bermuda held in October 2023, there was one independent candidate. Furthermore, there are several Commonwealth jurisdictions whose governments include independent members of Parliament. For example, Australia. Canada allows for independent MPs in both the provincial and levels. Hong Kong, approximately half of their legislative council consists of independent members. Cayman Islands, a smaller jurisdiction like Bermuda, they're independent members of parliament. In Jersey, the largest of the Channel Islands, the majority of the representatives of independent like Bermuda, and Jersey is a self-governing British Crown colony with a population of 107,000 people approximately.
Great Britain has some independent members of parliament.
Yeah, but people were holding their bated breath. What will Bermuda's parliament look like if all those independents got in?
And the machinations
Yes,
of
it was
government.
all kinds of discussion.
All kinds of discussion
in this election.
And very intense at some times as well. Now, an electoral or voting system is a set of rules used to determine the results of an election. Electoral systems used in Bermuda is referred to the first past the post. This system is also used to elect members of parliament for the UK, several other British colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, as well as the US Congress, Canada, and India. Our audience may be interested to know that the presence of third parties is not new to our democracy. Back in the 1990s, members of the PLP left to form the Bermuda Democratic Party. Prior to that, in 1980s, a PLP member left to form the National Liberal Party. In the 1990s, some United Bermuda Party members left that party and joined the PLP. And in the early 2000s, there were some UBP members who quit the United Bermuda Party and formed the Bermuda Democratic Alliance, the forerunner to the One Bermuda Alliance. Another third party, as earlier you mentioned, Tina, is the Democratic Party. In the 2000s, then they fielded 10 candidates in our election, in our general election this year. 25 persons ran as independent candidates in that election. I think that was the largest number of independent candidates to run since the inception of party politics in Bermuda in 1968.
Right now, the members, I do believe, of the House of Assembly should be making their way down from, over. So used to the Sessions House,
yes.
Sessions House, but making their way from Veritas Place. His Excellency, the Governor, will return to the Cabinet Office lawn, ascend the throne steps. He'll bow to the President, bow to the left, and His Excellency, the Governor. He'll acknowledge members of the House of Assembly as they take up their positions and proceed by the Sergeant at Arms bearing the mace, the Clerk to the Legislature in his honor, the Speaker of the House, who we did find out, we did get this message.
We did.
We got a message from behind the chamber doors that Dennis Lister Sr. has been reelected as the Speaker. We're still just trying who the new Deputy Speaker is now,
yes.
that the Honorable Cousin Derek Burgess
is no longer with us.
No, he's still with us.
He's still with us, yes.
He's still with us.
He's not in Parliament.
He's no longer in Parliament, as he chose not to run this time around, having served successfully in Parliament for many years.
Many years.
His Excellency will remove his headdress, whilst Bishop Hill, the Honorable Bishop Nicholas Hill, will recite the prayers. And then we'll have the speech from the throne. And we will see what the government agenda is, the Progressive Labor Party's agenda, legislative agenda, and the things planned for this party.
Yes, with bated breath, we wait. Well, let me remind people that there have been a number of other firsts.
Okay.
The Progressive Labor Party was the first political party to be established in Bermuda in February 1963. and its leader was Mr. W.N. Richardson. Ernest Acudo was the first person of Portuguese heritage to serve as Speaker of the House of Assembly.
Mr. Dakota.
Yes. Hilda Aiken and Edna Watson were the first women to win seats in the House of Assembly. The historic victory was achieved in the 1948 general election. Mrs. Lois Brown Evans, who later had the title of Dame conferred upon her posthumously, was the first black woman elected to Bermuda's parliament, and she was the first female opposition leader in the entire British Commonwealth. Bermuda also witnessed Dame Lois being appointed the first politically appointed Attorney General. The late Gloria McPhee was the first woman to be appointed as a minister to cabinet. And there have been outstanding women who've served as premier, the Honorable Dame Pamela Gordon for the United Bermuda Party, Dame Jennifer Smith for the Progressive Labor Party, and the Honorable Paula Cox for the Progressive Labor Party.
Yes, indeed. And with Premier Jennifer Smith at the helm, the general election of 2003 took place under a revised format of 36 single-seat constituencies. This was recommended by the Boundaries Commission of 2001-2002, that the number of constituencies into which Bermuda should be divided should be 36. This commission also recommended that the number of elected members of the House of Assembly should be 30, with each constituency returning one member to the House of Assembly. Sir Frank Blackman from Barbados was the chairman of the Boundaries Commission, and the other members who served with him included the Honorable Sir Brian Smedley, the late Honorable C.E. Eugene Cox, the late Honorable Dame Lois Brown Evans, and Bermuda's, and the Honorable, and Mr. John Barrett, JP.
Now, we were talking about voting systems.
I do want to just say this.
Oh, okay.
That it's been wonderful doing the commentary with you and watching over the years the number of women that have stepped up to enter the world of politics. I often say to people, in fact, I was talking with Minister Caesar recently, and I say people forget what a magnitude it is to take up and become a politician, to put yourself out there to be elected, to sit in the Senate week after week, to sit in the House of Assembly late nights, and sometimes having the challenge of raising families, raising children, being possibly a partner, wife, and all of that, and have constituents come to your home, call you all hours of the night. So to all the elected members and those that have chosen to serve, and to the women in this Women's History Month, I salute you. Having watched my own mother, Dame Lois Brown Evans, give up her time, her talent, her hours to serve, it is quite an honor. To all the women who step up and serve during this Women's History Month, I salute you.
And I echo your sentiments. It is a sacrifice. And it's something that when the women do stand up, or even the gentlemen, it's a sacrifice that they make because they, at the end of the day, they are desirous of serving their country. And so we do acknowledge and thank and applaud them for that. And their families, because surely their families must support their efforts as well in the kinds of sacrifices that have to be made. And for the betterment of our society, our Bermuda.
And I was hoping to get a camera shot to see if they have started, the members of the House of Assembly have started down the steps. I mean, I keep saying the Sessions House.
Coming down the road.
Yeah.
Hopefully the road doesn't have steps in it.
I'm so used to the Sessions House. After all this time, I'm ready for it now. ready for it to reopen. And wonderful having Parliament up in the Sessions House.
I think they are too. And you know, this having the convening of Parliament take place on the grounds of the cabinet, that was introduced when the Progressive Labour Party first won the government. So from 1999, we've been having the convening on the grounds, except of course for the years when the pandemic took over our lives. So, and we're grateful that the weather has cooperated. Okay, so we were talking about the advantages and disadvantages, or we were about to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of voting systems. For example, an MP is elected for each constituency, and we're talking now, let me give you the context. Earlier we talked about the Weber's thoughts around voting and Beetham's thoughts around voting and political legitimacy and whether or not it was good, and the whole idea of first past the post. So in that context, we are looking at some of the advantages and disadvantages to this system. For example, when an MP is elected for a constituency, this usually means that there will be a strong constituency-MP relationship. Another advantage of this system being first past the post, is easily understood. The MP can be easily approached, hopefully, by his constituents, given that the constituency is small, and so the MP is also familiar with the voters. Some of the disadvantages of the first past the post electoral system. One of the disadvantages is that the political parties do not always get fair representation. Also, often the winning party is often elected by less than 50% of the voters. And it is argued that people often do not bother to vote because they think that their vote will not count, or will have little chance of helping elect their candidate, especially if a voter is in a constituency considered a safe seat for either political party, and that voter is considering voting for a candidate of a different political party. There are other voting systems as well. There's a voting system referred to as proportional voting. This system is used by many countries, and it's widely used for national legislatures. It's the single most common electoral system used by 80 countries. Under this system, subgroups of an electorate are reflected proportionately, and the aim of such a voting system is that all votes cast contribute to the results so that each representative in an assembly is mandated by a roughly equal number of voters, and therefore all votes have equal weight, And it is considered that proportional representation systems provide balanced representation to the varying factions.
And in a few moments, we'll have, thank you, Heather, in a few moments, we will have the arrival of His Excellency, the Governor. And we will ask, as he makes his way, that you would stand.
This year, we don't have the Bermuda Regiment Band. We know that they add to the pomp of the ceremony, so the regiment band is certainly a miss. The color that they add, the music, and...
Yeah, it was delight to have them.
In November of last year.
Last year.
Yeah, they were brilliant. They marched down
Right.
Court Street and onto Cabinet grounds looking resplendent in their uniforms and their precision of marking and the music that they played.
But it was great.
It was great. So a shout out to the bandmaster. We do miss you.
Absolutely. All right, it looks like the members of the House of Assembly are just about ready to round the corner and head on to the Cabinet lawn. And so we're going to believe that all is well. Everything worked out well up there.
Yes, no crises, no constitutional crises.
The procession order will be the Black Rod, Chief Inspector Andrew Smalling, followed by the Sergeant of Arms, Sergeant Major Arnold Allen, EM, and then the Clerk to the Legislature, Mr. Clark W. Sumner, and the honor of the Speaker of the House will be Dennis Lister, Senior.
And then you'll have the
He's been
cabinet
elected.
ministers as well.
Followed by the Premier and Minister of Finance, the Opposition Leader, Deputy Speaker, who we do not know who is the Deputy Speaker as yet. And then the Government Whip, and then the members of the Cabinet, followed the Opposition.
The new Deputy Premier, the Honorable Zane J.S. De Silva. He's also the Minister of Housing and Municipalities. And then, of course, the other cabinet ministers. Did you name them?
Not as yet.
Okay.
It will.
Well, so I was getting ahead of myself.
That's
was
all
I?
right. It's the arrival of, we have them arriving on the grounds now. Led by Black Rod, Chief Inspector Andrew Smalling, Sergeant at Arms bearing the mace, Sergeant Major Allen. His Excellency, the Governor, is taking up position at the throne in preparation of retreat from the throne. And we have the arrival, as we said, Sergeant Major Allen carrying the mace, the Clerk to the Legislature, Clark Sumner, the newly elected, the Honorable Speaker of the House, Dennis Lister, Premier and Minister of Finance, the Honorable E. David G. Burt, JP, MP, the Opposition Leader, the Honorable Jerry Anderson, MP, the Deputy Speaker,
Deputy Premier.
No, well, in the order of possession, it's supposed to be Deputy Speaker, but the the Deputy Premier and Minister of Housing and Municipalities, the Honorable Zane J.S. De Silva. Now, am I to understand that the Government Whip is Levita Fogo or the Deputy Speaker? Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Women's History Month, yay! All right, I'm sorry. Let me go back in protocol here. The Government Whip, Mr. Neville Tyrrell.
Kim Wilson, the Minister of Health. Mr. Neville, the Honorable Minister Neville Weeks, Minister of National Security.
Minister Michael Weeks, Minister of National Security, Minister of Economy and Labor, Jason Haywood, but I do think Minister of Cabinet and Office of Digital Innovation, Diallo Ravane, Minister of Youth, Sport Development and Seniors, the Honorable Tanae Furbett, the Minister of Transport, Tourism, Culture, the Honorable Owen K. Darrell, Minister of Home Affairs, the Honorable Jashay Adams. I think I saw the Honorable Alexa Lightbourne, the Minister of Home Affairs, Junior Minister of Finance, or the Honorable Wayne Furbett, and the Junior Minister of Justice, Dennis Lister, and the Minister for Public Works and the Environment, Jashay Adams. Members of the House of Assembly, Levita Fogo, who is now the Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Kim Swan, JPMP, the Honorable Jamal Simmons, Renee Ming, the Honorable Renee Ming, Lawrence Scott, MP, Christopher Famous, MP, Scott Pierman, JP, Curtis, Reverend Emily Gail Dill, Leroy G.W. Bean, JP, and Paul G. Wilmot. Members of the House of Assembly for the opposition, Mr. Ben Smith, and JPMP, the Honorable Craig Canadair, JPMP, Mr. Scott Pierman, MP, Mr. Robert King, MP, Mr. Vance Campbell, JPMP, Robin Tucker, MP, Michael Fay, JP, MP, Douglas Takuto, Dwayne Robinson, and Linda Smith. Welcome to the members. Please remain standing for the prayers.
As we gather to hear the speech from the throne, we first approach the throne of heaven and the King of Kings to seek his guidance and his love and protection upon us. But before we do, I invite you just to hold a moment of silence as we collectively hold in our mind's eye these islands and its people, the beauty and the complexity, the opportunities and problems, the vulnerabilities, the poor, the voiceless, the young and the elderly, all those things that may cause us worry or concern, as we also pray for all those who have positions to influence and affect the lives of others. We do so not just to pray for the legislature today, but we also pray for all those who have any influence over the lives of other people. We hold a moment of silence as we lift up in our hearts this island of Bermuda. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful yet fragile island where we live. People who live at our shores, thank you for life and for the preservation of all that we enjoy, our family, friends, and neighbors, for our rich history, our strong traditions, our stable government. But as with everything that we touch, O Lord, we also grieve for our failures to preserve, love, and care for it and one another as we should, recognizing continued divisions and injustices and violence and trauma that persist, but recalling your forgiveness and your grace, and in obedience to your commandments, we pray for all in authority under you and over us. Sovereign and gracious Lord, we bow our heads and our hearts before you to thank you for a peaceful election, that you have raised up among us women and men to lead this country forward into this new parliamentary year. We pray for our earthly sovereign, Charles our King, Governor Andrew Murdoch, our Premier, David Burt, and his cabinet, the Speaker of the House, the Leader of the Opposition, Jaren Richardson, and all elected officials. We pray for the President-elect of the Senate, Joan Dillis-Wright, for all senators, and for the civil service in all of its parts. From you alone come all counsel and understanding, so please grant to all in positions of responsibility the guidance of your Holy Spirit. Pour out your heavenly wisdom for every policy, decision, and just law. Endue every person in public service with the ability to seek your face and listen to your voice and to understand the cares and needs of the people they serve, seeking always after truth, to use their individual gifts and abilities with generosity and with zeal. Grant them the ability as good stewards to handle the resources at their disposal with integrity for the greatest possible public good, prosperity, justice, and unity. May they never lead these islands wrongly through love of power or desire to please, of unworthy ideals, but laying aside all private interests and partiality, may they keep in mind their responsibilities to seek to improve the condition of all humankind and of our fragile environment. May they be humble in spirit, visionary in leadership, seeking to serve rather than to be served, courageous and clear in their deliberations and communications, and free from partiality and partisanship. And we pray for all your people, those who live, work, and visit, that in our islands we may be enabled to live peaceful and godly lives in community, learning to love and to respect one another, giving voice where things are amiss, that your kingdom come and your name may be hallowed on earth as it is in heaven. That through this government, all would know and experience your blessing. So fill our hearts with love of your name, love of our country, love of all its people. We ask these things in the precious name of your Son, our Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
Honourable members of the Senate, have you elected your president?
Your Excellency, I am honored to inform you that I have been elected to that position, and I now submit myself with all humility to Your Excellency's approbation.
Madam President, I most heartily approve of your election. Members of the Honourable House of Assembly, have you elected your Speaker?
Your Excellency, I am honored to inform Your Excellency that I have been elected to that position. However, on order to duty and inadequate my abilities to discharge the conferred in me, I have accepted the appointment and now submit myself with all humility to Your Excellency's victory.
Mr. Speaker, I most heartily approve of your election.
Thank you. Your Excellency, thank you. Your Excellency, I thank you for your gracious affection. Right? I must now, in the name of and on behalf of His Majesty's faithful Province of Bermuda, in order that they may be enabled fully to discharge their duty to the King and country, claim all their ancient rights and privileges, particularly freedom of speech in their debates, that they may have full access to Your Excellency and that their proceedings may receive the most favorable interpretation.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Honourable House of Assembly, in His Majesty's name, I do assure to His Majesty's faithful Commons of the Bermudas the full enjoyment of their ancient rights and privileges, and that they may depend on a favourable interpretation of their proceedings.
Your Excellency, on behalf of His Majesty's faithful Commons of Bermuda, I thank you for those assurances.
Thank you. Take those off. And glasses. Great. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, thousands of Bermudians cast their votes in the February general election. A third successive mandate cemented the people's trust in the government and endorsed the vision for building a fairer Bermuda. The people of Bermuda have entrusted this government with a renewed mandate, a mandate not just to lead but to listen, to collaborate and to build a more inclusive Bermuda where every voice is heard, every Bermudian has a stake in a shared future, and where every Bermudian will not merely survive but thrive. While this election reaffirms support for that vision, it also serves as a reminder of the work still to be done. In the months ahead, the government will act urgently to tackle Bermuda's stubbornly high cost of living, further strengthen the economy and ensure the government serves every Bermudian with fairness and accountability, creating an affordable Bermuda. Madam and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, members of the House of Assembly, No economy is immune to the effects of global inflation and rising costs. Bermudians are feeling that pressure daily. The government must act decisively to tackle this problem, ensuring that duty relief reaches the people who need lower costs and not just corporate bottom lines. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, food prices are shocking, and there seems to be no respite from their ever-increasing costs. The government has taken steps to reduce costs for grocers and wholesalers importing goods into Bermuda, with the expectation that these costs would be reflected at the register. To ensure that such reductions are passed on to consumers and not to profits, the government will implement fair pricing control and pricing transparency measures while expanding the categories of goods, of essential goods, accruing 0% import duty. Further, the government will amend the Cost of Living Commission Act of 1974 to expand the investigatory powers of the Cost of Living Commission to examine the books and records of all businesses involved in the supply of food and other essential goods. For far too long, business has profited at the expense of everyday Bermudians, and the sunshine of public scrutiny cannot just apply to the government. It must also apply to those on whom Bermudians rely to purchase the goods to sustain themselves. Recent experience in specific sectors in Bermuda has decreased the choice of Bermudians in the marketplace. These actions seldom result in reduced costs, and the lack of regulation increases the risk of harm to the local consumer. Therefore, the government will review and amend the regulatory authority's mandate to oversee both regulated and unregulated sectors, ensuring transparent pricing, fair competition, enhanced consumer protection, and the power to prevent unnecessary concentration of market power in key sectors. As the government ensures that those supplying essential retail goods treat Bermudians fairly, the government must ensure that financial services entities treat their customers fairly. The government will continue to strengthen laws to protect mortgage and lending customers facing financial difficulties and update the Lender Code of Conduct to ensure more fair borrowing practices. The Regulation and Competition Authority will be empowered to impose penalties on financial institutions that do not abide by the codes of conduct. The government will work with the Bermuda Monetary Authority and industry stakeholders to review home insurance regulations and policy reforms that allow homes to select appropriate coverage levels based on realistic risk assessments. The goal of these changes is simple: to lower this expense for Bermuda's homeowners. To further tackle the cost of energy, the government will advance amendments to the Electricity Act of 2016 to limit categories of recoverable expenses that BELCO is allowed to pass on to consumers, and will the regulatory authority implement fairer pricing on retail electricity tariffs. The requirement for a mandatory connection to BELCO will be reviewed to allow for a more diverse and independent approach to energy generation. Supporting Bermudians through all stages of life. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, every generation is defined by unique socio-economic factors that dictate how lives are lived and how we interact within our community. This sandwich generation is working, raising their children, and concerned for their education and development, all while caring for aging parents. The government's commitment, as outlined in its election platform, is to support Bermudians through all stages of life. The approach will be people-centered, focused on ensuring that every Bermudian has tools and opportunities, not just to survive, but to thrive. The legislation to implement an education authority will change how public education is funded, governed, and led. Execution on the critical work to transform public education will continue as signature schools develop and mould our young people for their eventual careers. Amendments to the Education Act of 1996 will enhance and strengthen inclusive and special education for children with additional needs and disabilities. For students and their parents who are looking for additional options to fund higher education, the government will expand access to funding for Bermudians to obtain tertiary education, such as the establishment of Hardship Education Fund, increased scholarships, and government-supported partnerships with financial institutions in the private sector. The government will introduce a guaranteed loan programme with additional legislation that will follow for the immediate garnishment of wages should persons not repay their guaranteed loan. Tax reform is key to tackling Bermuda's cost of living and cost of doing business, and during this section, the government will implement the recommendations from the forthcoming report from the Tax Reform Commission to ensure that appropriate fiscal safeguards are established for the new revenue from the corporate income tax. With the recent compensation agreement reached with public sector unions, it is now time to ensure that public sector pensions are sustainable for the future. Accordingly, the government will introduce amendments to the Public Service Superannuation Act of 1981 that will eliminate the growing unfunding liability to tax and ensure the fund's stability into the future. The amendments will also restore the annual cost of living increase for public sector retirees, which has been suspended since 2014. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the record growth in the international business sector has ungirded the local economy. The success within the IB confirms Bermuda's position as a jurisdiction of choice. This success is achievable in other sectors, and the government is committed to fostering the necessary environment for the growth of local businesses. In keeping with the 2025 platform undertakings, the government will: 1. Continue the implementation of Bermuda's economic development strategy to drive business expansion, support entrepreneurs, attract investment, and develop local talent. 2. Complete the implementation of cooperative legislation and establish a registrar for cooperatives, supported by a dedicated government department to administer and promote the sector. 3. Develop and implement a national entrepreneurship strategy and a digital entrepreneurial strategy that will supply an expansion of small and medium-sized businesses, ownership focused on women, youth, and Bermudian business owners. 4. Advance Bermuda's position as a digital financial hub by supporting voluntary digital identity solution and innovation-friendly regulations to attract more investment while ensuring Bermudians benefit from new opportunities. And lastly, 5, cut red tape by streamlining business setup and operation processes while finalising a one-stop shop for registration and licensing to encourage entrepreneurship and new local businesses. Recognising the protracted and sometimes acrimonious debate around the government's marine protection intentions, the government will pause the implementation of new marine protected areas until an agreement is reached with local fishermen on better enforcement and fairer data collection rules to support any new areas. Bermuda's tourism industry continues to rebound, but the government is determined to do more to support investment in Bermuda, and during this session, the government will advance amendments to the Tourism Investment Act of 2017 to include smaller guest houses as well as health and medical tourism sites, making these developments eligible for the suite of concessions available under the Act. Transforming healthcare coverage and accessibility. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the journey to universal healthcare has been a challenging one, interrupted by 2020's declaration of the global pandemic and the ongoing need to make the existing inefficient system still deliver results for our people, while implement a universal system focused on efficiency, prevention and primary care, guaranteeing that every resident has access to necessary medical services with reduced co-pays. The government will expand HIP to include an annual preventative doctor's visit and examine the options to expand specialist coverage under future care. The government is committed to ensuring that our hospitals are readily available for those in need of acute care, which includes transitioning patients who no longer require acute care to suitable alternative care settings. This approach is crucial for freeing up acute care hospital beds, reducing extended wait times in emergency room for those who require inpatient stays, and managing the BHB's operational costs effectively. Solution requires affordable community care designed to ensure that support is directed to those who need it most. Following these initiatives, other measures will be introduced to facilitate the timely discharge of patients from the hospital once acute care is no longer necessary. These actions are vital in maintaining accessible and timely hospital care for those who require it most. The power to discharge may free up hospital, but if persons have nowhere to go, that will only increase stress on families. There are currently 4 care homes that are in various phases of development, and the government is committed to expanding the interest-free loan scheme for home modifications for seniors and the disabled. A comprehensive review of the Mental Health Act of 1968 will be undertaken to modernise processes and provide greater protection for those who interact with Bermuda's public mental health services. Mental health and wellness are essential to our community's well-being, and access to the resources for those needing this assistance will be provided. During this session, the legislature will also be invited to consider these additional healthcare-related measures. 1, enforcing a ban on industrially produced trans fats to promote healthier diets and reduce the health risks they present. 2, restrictions on favourable vaping products to protect public health, especially among young people. 3, repeal of the sections of the Criminal Code of 1907 that address pregnancy termination and the requirement for committee approval. 4, a legislative review to ensure rights of accessibility and opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Promoting a more responsive and people-centred government. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, too many of our laws have not kept pace with modern approaches to the administration of justice. There is a need for law reform, and the Commission charged with advising the government on these matters will be reinstituted and restored to working order. During this session, the government will address the following matters of law reform. 1, amendments to the Young Offenders Act of 1950 to modernise the treatment of young people impacted by the criminal justice system, commencing with an increase to the age of criminal responsibility from 8 to 14. 2, developing a statutory regime for the compensation of those persons wrongfully imprisoned and convicted. 3, a comprehensive review of the system of legal aid to promote equitable access to justice for all. US Supreme Justice Potter Stewart observed, "Justice is what fairness looks like." As the government's general election platform said, a justice system focused solely on punishment fails to address the root causes of crime or support long-term solutions. The government believes in restorative justice and crime prevention, emphasising accountability, rehabilitation and personal growth. The government will continue to implement the National Violence Reduction Strategy to break the cycle of violence and create safer environments for all citizens. To complement the proposed legal reforms and the crime prevention approaches, there is a need to determine the status of the security services and their mission in the modern Bermuda. Government House and the government have agreed that the 2014 Security and Defence Review must be refreshed, and how to accomplish this critical task will be the subject of discussions on those areas reserved to the Governor and those delegated to the Government of Bermuda. This year, Royal Bermuda Regiment celebrates its 60th anniversary, and the government looks forward to appropriately marking the enduring contribution of this organisation to Bermuda society. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, our core 1968 Constitution that was intended to be a bridge to independence within 5 years is approaching its 60th anniversary. Bipartisan agreement that reform the 1968 order is required, taken with a fresh call for voting reforms, sets the stage for the commencement of a fulsome consultative process to discuss these matters, including reducing the number of seats in the House of Assembly, belonger status and absentee voting for residents and students overseas. One man, woman, one vote, each vote of equal value remains the system under which governments are elected in Bermuda, and it bears remembering that it was just in 2003 that this genuine universal adult suffrage was fully realised. Electoral and constitutional reforms should mirror the times in which we live, and the strength of systems is in their ability to adjust to meet the demands of the times. The policy work on the precise nature of that consultative process has begun, and a report will be introduced for consideration of the legislature as we wrestle with this critical requirement for the advancement of our constitutional system and relationship with His Majesty's government in London. With the substantive issues in relation to the Commission of Inquiry into historic land losses now resolved in the courts, the legislature will again be invited to take note of the Commission's reports and to consider their findings and recommendations. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the development, implementation and execution of government policy and programmes is made possible through a dedicated and impartial public service. Retention of public officers in many technical areas has often proven difficult, as private sector salaries cannot be matched by the public sector. However, in addition to the work done to address the salaries of public officers, the government will launch a public service scholarship programme, providing university tuition support in exchange for a 5-year commitment to public service or public healthcare. This will be accompanied by the modernisation of the Bermudan Public Service Graduate Scheme, with competitive incentives to attract and develop skilled future public sector leaders on a 5-year track. Public officers must also have the tools by which to deliver on these mandates, and in the first instance there is much to be done to make delivery more seamless, removing process that distract from the execution of core objectives. The government will continue the digitisation of government services, providing greater access to online services, including increasing options for online payments to improve convenience and efficiency for the public, and as digital transformation of services. The government will increase the amount of government information that is open and accessible online to reduce the unenviable burden of petty requests on public officers. This applies to government boards, quangos, and government financial information. A simplified project management and procurement code of practice will create a faster process for awarding government contracts to accelerate key initiatives, including the upgrading of Bermuda's public infrastructure. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in addition to the measures set out above, during this session, the legislature will be invited to consider the following matters. 1. Clean air regulations. 2. Electronic communications (cybercrime) amendment bill. Insurance amendment bill. 4. Banks and deposit companies (over the limit fees) regulations. 5. Banks and Deposit Companies, in brackets, Access to Banking Amendment Bill. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, 100 years ago, 5 black men, Ace Henry, Joaquin Martin, David Augustus, and James Rabane, pooled their resources and with £750 gave birth to the Bermuda Recorder. Mr. Place was the driving force, and he once said, "I've known the time I've gone to that office and knelt down and prayed to God to give me strength and wisdom to carry on the publication of the Recorder for just one more day, just so we might be able to rectify some of the conditions which prevailed at the time with regard to my people, the black people of Bermuda." In reflecting upon this century of the Recorder's founding, all Bermudians can draw inspiration from this story of triumph out of adversity, the pooling of resources for a common purpose, and the true spirit of entrepreneurship that laid the foundation for the alternative, representative media voice in Bermuda. We are all heirs to such perseverance, and the government is determined to create the conditions that support, reward, and celebrate those who would join in the task of building a fairer Bermuda. Housing and infrastructure. With the creation of ministry devoted to housing solutions, the government has ascribed the highest priority to the development of affordable housing for Bermudians. The expansion of housing supply in Bermuda is critical to our future economic fortune, and the government will leave no stone unturned in this effort. In addition to partnering with the private sector to offer rent-to-own programs and completing the amendments to the Landlord and Tenant Act to support mutual positive rental relationships, during this session, the government will advance amendments to the Acquisition of Land Act of 1970 and the Bermuda Housing Act of 1980 to provide for a more efficient, streamlined means by which to address vacant and derelict properties. These units will be returned to the housing stock, providing additional housing for Bermudians. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in recent years, the bedrock neighbourhoods of Victoria Road, Alexandra Road and Cedar Park have been forced into a band-aid existence. This unique and proud area cannot be adequately served in this ongoing piecemeal way. Therefore, the government will develop a master plan for these areas to address long-running issues, including water and sewage, lighting and general home improvement. The Private Roads Improvement Act of 1969 and the Private Roads Lighting Act of 1984 will be amended to provide greater authority for the Minister responsible for public works to act in the interest of general safety of a residential area in the installation of traffic calming measures, mirrors and other modifications aimed at making our neighbourhoods safer. Madam Members of the Senate and members of the House of Assembly, the institution of a corporate income tax for Bermuda presents an opportunity to implement meaningful reforms of Bermuda's tax regime that will ensure the burden of taxation is fairer, while also ensuring that Bermuda's economy remains competitive and local businesses can thrive. The government will ensure that these new funds are managed prudently to reduce Bermuda's debt, while also making the required investments to upgrade Bermuda's infrastructure and improve the delivery of public services. Bermuda will be able to accompany these two fiscal necessities while also building a sovereign wealth fund to the benefit of all Bermudians through strategic investments. Therefore, in this session, the government will establish a sovereign wealth fund for Bermuda with an independent board to invest excess proceeds from the corporate income tax for the benefit of future generations of Bermudians. Traditionally, at this point, the governor is permitted to add a few words of his or her own. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, I am grateful for the convention which by tradition allows the Governor to add a few words of his or her own at the end of the throne speech. It is a privilege to be part of this tradition so recently after my swearing in. The importance of fairness, good governance and accountability are at the heart of the Constitution. I therefore welcome the government's commitment to serve every Bermudian with fairness and accountability. The importance of these principles and the maintenance of and respect for the separation of powers of institutions under the Constitution cannot be underestimated. Bermuda is not immune to global issues. As we convene, the world feels increasingly uncertain and unstable. In such times, there is a need not just to maintain these principles of good governance, but protect and strengthen them. The stability that Bermuda offers to its people and visitors, including with its world-class regulatory mechanisms and independent judiciary, are essential to Bermuda's health and future prosperity. As Governor, I will contribute to championing these principles in the execution of my duties and in partnership with the government. As the challenges being faced in Bermuda have evolved over time, so must the law. I therefore look forward to supporting the government's commitment to reinstitute and restore the Law Reform Commission. A well-resourced, effective commission which engages with members of the public, civil society, and institution can play a key role in modernising criminal and civil law for the benefit of Bermuda. I also welcome the commitment to refresh the 2014 Security and Defence Review. It is, as the government acknowledged, a critical task. This work will help ensure the uniformed services have the strategic direction to continue to meet the needs of Bermuda, both now and the years to come. My time exploring the island has brought into sharp relief the importance and extent of Bermuda's unique natural environment. With climate change and global losses of biodiversity, the danger to the environment is clear and present. I note the government's plan to protect the environment and encourage all those involved to work together and act before it is too late. We all have a duty to do what we can to protect the environment for those generations that follow us. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House Assembly, I declare this session open and may God guide you in your deliberations.
The reading of the speech from the throne on this day of the convening of the legislature. Honorable His Excellency Andrew Murdoch, and he is leaving now. And as he leaves the cabinet grounds, The president and senators will return to the Senate chamber to resume their business, and the Speaker of the House, the new Deputy Speaker, and the Premier and members of the Honorable House of Assembly will retire to continue on with their business of the day, and they do have some business of the day as well. So they will carry on their business until, I guess, about lunchtime. But it was a shorter speech, definitely. We kind of thought so because of the election
timing,
and the
just-
timing and so forth. The government, of course, let out with pricing control and making sure consumer protection, and then updating the lender code of conduct for banking and financial institutions. Hey,
That's a biggie. That's
yeah, that was
very important to us consumers, us people, the people of Bermuda. And also what stood out to me was the fact that they're going to do something about the derelict houses and the vacant houses. And we'll be revising the act with regard to that. They are looking to improve these buildings because housing shortage is being felt.
yes, everywhere.
And cost of living, as you pointed out, and rent and all that.
The Private Roads
Amendment,
Amendment Improvement Act, and the private roads received a round of applause that they're greater authority for the minister to act in the interest of general safety in residential areas, installation of traffic calming measures, mirrors, other modifications aimed at making neighborhoods safer. That received a good round of applause as well.
And they're going to look at the Mental Health Act and do a comprehensive revision of that. And that's important, our mental state. Sometimes we only think about one's physical state, but that is important, that's going to be looked at as well. And the Young Offenders Act, they're going to make some amendments to that and some statutory regimes around that.
Yeah, all in mind of the
Our social fabric.
justice.
Justice,
And of
yes.
course, the cost of commission will examine the books of all merchants who provide like food sources.
Yes,
Check and
yes.
see. So that's a big one. So
That
and the strengthening of the regulatory bodies as well. The
Yes.
regulatory measure oversight. That's look, it's 2025. We got to do some things different. And of course. Understanding that globally, everyone is feeling. I talked to a friend of mine in Atlanta. She told me about the price of eggs. We couldn't believe it. So all around the world.
All around, yeah.
But I want to thank everyone once again for joining us as the members retire to the House of Assembly and the Senate members retire to the Senate chambers. I want to thank you again for joining us for the coverage of the convening of the legislature 2025. My co-host, Heather Walker, who helps us, actually puts together first draft, and she gets the script, so we appreciate Heather always making sure that she has time to support us as we prepare for the convening of the legislature every year on behalf of the Department of Communications and the CITV. I want to thank you again for joining us for this year's commentary, and I believe this is it for this year. I don't know if we're going to be back in November.
We'll see.
We'll
But
see.
Tina, let me say that it has always been a delight working with you and the CITV team, and I enjoy putting together the commentary and learning some more about
Bermuda's history.
Bermuda's history and political development.
Yeah, it's excellent. So well done. Thank you very much for joining us, and wishing you a Bermuda beautiful Friday.
Yes.